On March 30th, Obama announced that he accepted the idea that the U.S. auto industry should be saved, but he rejected GM and Chrysler's plans that had submitted, their reorganization plans. He said that Chrysler had to seek a partnership with Fiat within 30 days, and that 30 days is going to be up on the 30th of this month, and that GM's plan wasn't radical enough. It had to demand more from the shareholders. When I heard that report, I felt like the moment when General Westmoreland said we had to bomb the village in order to save it, because, of course, I'm part of those shareholders who have to be screwed as a retired auto worker. So the workers' wages and benefits in the auto industry make up less than 10% of the total package of expenses. So over the last 30 years, there's been a chipping away of that 10% of our wages and benefits and working conditions by a whole range of processes. In fact, in a way, the current crisis that we're in today is really just a continuation of the crisis that began 30 years ago. So the industry has gone through this reorganization of whipsawing plants against each other to get lower prices, outsourcing, introducing lean production, draconian absentee policies, selling off parts plants, two-tier wages, joint programs whereby the union and the company work together. And this teaches all of us workers that there can be win-win situations. And it also, because all of these clipboarders that come through the plants are jointly appointed by management and a union official, and it's a definite form of corruption because they're the enforcers for the union at that point. In my plant, for example, there were 60 people who were the clipboarders, 60 people who had joint appointments, and what do you know? They always lined up with what the bureaucracy said in my plant. And explained why you couldn't do anything because it was a violation of the law of the contract. I was once actually brought up on charges and almost fired for being at a demonstration in front of the corporate headquarters on my own time. And there was actually a leaflet put out in the plant saying that we should be fired under Article 147, which means you can't disrupt production. You know, how are we disrupting production? Well, we weren't, but it just shows the extent for which the union becomes the enforcer for what the company wants. The CEO was embarrassed because we had demonstrated in front of his corporate headquarters. Okay, so auto production has been restructured over the last 30 years, and what's been the result for auto workers? Well, they just released that in UAW members, the total membership of the UAW is now about 431 or 32,000. That is all UAW members, including state workers, healthcare workers, graduate students at NYU. That's less than the number of people who used to work at GM in production and skilled trades 30 years ago. In fact, today, 62,000 work at GM. And according to the plan, the reorganization plan, which Obama rejected, by 2014, there would be 46,400 GM workers and 15 more plants closed. So there has been a tremendous reduction of jobs in the industry over the last 30 years. And I would say that there's also been a restructuring. That is, there was a plan. There is a strategic plan. GM and the other corporations have a strategic plan, but it's to make profit. So, for example, they abandoned the making of cars in this country. They make cars in other countries. They make medium-sized cars in other countries, but not in the United States. In the United States, they want people to buy light trucks or SUVs because they make $10,000 profit with each vehicle. So what I'm saying is there is now an economic crisis, and there's also an environmental crisis. And we have had 30 years of seeing this restructuring, which has not been for the benefit of the workforce. It has not created good jobs or more jobs. In fact, it's done just the opposite. It's eroded jobs, and it's eroded the, there are now workers represented by the UAW who make $14 an hour and who will never get pensions and who have inadequate health care benefits because there's been, for example, in American Axle, I worked for a company that used to be part of the GM enterprise, was sold off in 1995. They had 5 plants. They bought other plants and they put the new work in those other plants where the workers, also represented by the UAW, but make $14 an hour. Now, with the last contract, they've started closing the original plants so that, for example, there are 3 plants, these are all more rural plants, where $14 an hour is maybe actually the best wage in that rural area. But they started closing our plants. So, for example, I worked in Detroit. When I worked in Detroit, there were 2,700 workers who worked at my plant or at the forging operation next door. There are now, the forging plant is closed down because they opened up another plant an hour and a half away where they make $10 an hour. And there are now 900 workers in my facility. So what do we see as what we would like to have? Is it worth saving the auto industry if what we're going to have is fewer and fewer jobs with fewer and fewer decent wages and working conditions? And in fact, we have created a society which is totally dependent on SUVs, trucks, and auto. We have a situation where outside of New York City, probably Chicago, Washington, D.C., you have to have a car. In fact, everyone in your family has to have a car. And although we live, 80% of the people live in urban areas, we drive our cars, and 76% of us drive to work alone. So this is a totally irrational way of organizing our society, and it is the strategy of the auto companies, because in places like Detroit or Los Angeles, there were better mass transit systems 100 years ago when we had trolleys. Those trolley tracks were covered over. GM made buses then, so there was a big push to have buses and freeways and so forth. GM no longer makes buses. So when you think about, okay, how can we get out of the whole situation that we're faced with, particularly in the Midwest, I think particularly in Michigan, particularly in Indiana, but it's also true in Ohio, and it's going to become increasingly more of a problem in Ontario, where there have been auto plants for years and years and years. The problem is we can't trust the company. The management has shown they are totally bankrupt in terms of dealing with any kind of large-scale understanding of what's necessary for our society. Profit is their only motive. Okay, so they, if they get the money, the bailout money, there's no reason to think that they're going to use it wisely. Or develop a good product. And if any of you have seen that wonderful movie, Who Killed the Electric Car, you understand that they spend money but don't necessarily end up with a product that is something that they're going to continue to support. So we can't trust management, okay? Can we trust the government?